Neil Katyal is the former acting U.S. Solicitor General, and Andrew Weissmann is former general counsel at the FBI. There's a lot to dig into about what just happened last week and what's ahead, and we're going to do that. But, Neil, I mean, the message from many of Trump's supporters in the last few days seems to be focused on attacking the system, the judge, the jury, the participants in the process. I mean, you've worked in the judicial system and law enforcement and the system. What are the dangers to all of the people who are participating in the legal system if Trump's base simply does not believe, and the dangers to our country, really, if Trump's base simply does not believe in the outcomes of the legal system?
Yeah, I mean, this is Trump's MO every single time, which is burn the system down if it attacks him in any way. It's not the way I think any responsible former government official should behave. I think the system is more important than any individual person, but he never cares about that. Like now he's telling his supporters it's not a crime and this and that. Well, tell that to Michael Cohen, who after all went to jail for it and had all of the Trump supporters, applauding that back then. It's the same underlying thing. And look, if the system were rigged, Jen, like we'd be looking at 4 final convictions of Donald Trump in 4 different jurisdictions today, not the messy patchwork of partially litigated cases we have today. And just to get back to your question, like the threat is if he continues this rhetoric, there's going to be harm to potentially jurors, to potentially judges, law enforcement officers, and the like. It reminds me of back when in Georgia, a Republican election official said, Trump, cut out your rhetoric after 2020. Someone's about to get hurt. And of course, that happened so painfully for all of us to see on January 6th.
Yeah, Andrew, and you and I have talked about this, just to kind of build on what Neil was saying. We don't know what the impact of all this rhetoric is. It is people watching it and listening to it and thinking that it is a license to do something, to do others harm. An aspect of this are like a redux of 2020 to me, or I hear it that way. Talk to me about kind of your concerns here and what you hear when you hear these attacks on the judge, the jurists, others who are participating in the process.
What I would ask people to do is to actually look past the adjectives and adverbs and rhetoric and focus on facts. That is what happens in a courtroom. The people, I'm less concerned about Donald Trump and what a defendant says. Donald Trump is a defendant who has been convicted, and like most defendants who have been convicted, they say the process was unfair and they disagree with it. That's what defendants do. He happens to unfortunately also be the candidate for the Republican Party. But the real issue is the one, Jen, that you focused on, which is the enablers, the idea that Susan Collins is denigrating the system. What I would say is look at the facts. David Pecker, Hope Hicks, Jeff McConney, people aligned with and supportive of Donald Trump took the stand, and they were not accused of lying. They were never cross-examined to say they are not telling the truth, and they set out the damaging evidence that the jury found guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. So go to the actual evidence as opposed to just putting on a label, because facts matter. If facts do not matter, this country is lost. There is no basis to have the rule of law and to have any system that protects us from authoritarianism. And there is a written transcript that everyone can go to show what happened. It is, you do not have to take anyone's word for it. It is in black and white.
That's so true. And people can empower themselves to do exactly that. And they should if they have questions. Neil, I just talked about this, but there was something that the Republican Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, said during an interview with Fox News that just stuck out to me. And you've argued so many cases before the Supreme Court. You've been in that room more than most people. He basically seemed to suggest that the Supreme Court can be relied on to save Trump, like he has them in his pocket. Or, you could hear that. What was your reaction to hearing him talk about the Supreme Court like that? It's a different branch of government.
Yeah, the clip you just played showed the speaker saying he knows some of the justices personally and knows that many of them are concerned. I have no idea, Jen, how he would know that. I mean, I know the justices personally too. I have no stinking idea of what they might be thinking about this. And Trump has been, I think it's important to point out, a dead loser in the Supreme Court every time that it comes up. I mean, he 8-1 on executive privilege with only Justice Thomas siding with him in the 2020 election, rebuked lots of times. And here, there is no, I don't think that the United States Supreme Court sits to review state convictions generally. So, maybe they'll find some federal issue here and maybe there will be an appeal that will get there. But I think it's tough. And it's tough here, particularly because, Jen, the jury unanimously found Trump guilty, and not just of one count, but of 34 separate criminal convictions that are felonies. And they did so under the legal standard that is the hardest to prove for prosecutors, for government officials to prove in the system, beyond a reasonable doubt. They did it unanimously with all 12. They ran the table as they had to do in our system. Very, very hard to overturn that. Very hard to see the United States Supreme Court getting involved, despite what Speaker Johnson is insinuating.
Yeah, thank you for the clarification or helping people understand that. It just has stuck out to me since he said it. So let's talk about what happens next and the path forward. And Andrew, you have made this point, but since then Trump has made said even more attacks on people participating in the process. That some of the things he's been saying is violations of the gag order, attacking people involved in the process, will weigh on the judge during sentencing. That's coming up July 11th, which is a bit of a time from here. Talk to me about how you anticipate the impact will be and what you thought of kind of what he said on Friday and how the judge would be hearing that.
Well, two of the things that the judge, among many things that the judge will be considering, is the lack of remorse and the risk of recidivism. And first on lack of remorse, I mean, it's hard to think of a case that shows more lack of remorse. I mean, this is somebody who's prideful over what happened. And he's not only showing lack of remorse for himself, but he's sort of fomenting across the nation a disrespect for law completely. So, I mean, this is undermining of our system. Also, on recidivism, it is important to remember what the jury found here was that the 34 felonies that Neil referred to happened in 2017 in the Oval Office, 34 times. That is where the crime occurred. And what was the crime? It's the falsifying of business records to cover up a scheme to interfere with the 2016 election. And that scheme was hatched before the election, and it's carried out in the Oval Office. That was found beyond a reasonable doubt by this jury. You cannot think of a felony that goes more to the heart of our criminal justice system. And so those issues will be ones that are really weighing on the judge. And obviously, the rhetoric that it continues from Donald Trump with respect to judges, jurors, witnesses, their family members, all of that obviously is something that a judge will consider. So he's doing himself no favors in terms of himself and obviously in terms of his responsibility to the country. To me, it is reminiscent of what he was doing and led to on January 6th, where he could sit in the Oval Office while people were attacking his own vice presidents and threatening the vice president's life.
There are many things reminding me of those times as well, which is quite alarming to everyone, or should be. Andrew Weissmann and Neil Katyal, thank you both, as always, for taking the time to join me this afternoon.